Have you been on a radio program regularly? Has it been on the air for a long time? And you're a lady. Is your voice terribly well known to some member of this panel? Sometimes yes and sometimes no?
I think yes would be right for that.
Yes is the answer?
Mm-hmm.
Is your first name from Maine and your last name from this panel?
Yes, it is.
Is it Portland Hoffa?
I didn't realize he was a ringer there.
The ringer. Mrs. Fred Allen, meet Mr. Fred Allen.
Nice to meet you, dear.
This
has been the longest evening.
Really?
Yes.
I didn't realize that you weren't a recognized act until I came out tonight.
When JJ Shubert hired Fred Allen, it was for the role of a monologist in a Broadway production of The Passing Show of 1922. Allen would be performing his usual routine in front of the curtain while scenery was being changed behind. He was in charge of writing his own material. One popular gag was the Old Joke Cemetery. Allen had a curtain painted as a graveyard. On the tombstones were the punchlines to 46 old jokes. When the show moved to Chicago after 6 months, Allen met a dancer there named Portland Hoffa. He was soon instructed by the theater company that the show was moving to Hollywood. His cemetery gag prop curtain, however, was not. Allen quit. Back in New York, he demanded a $50 royalty check from the Shuberts when the gag turned up in other acts. They rehired him to MC Artists and Models, the first American revue to showcase chorus women topless. It was Allen's job to come on after the woman finished. The Shuberts and Allen soon came to a mutual release. He followed with the Greenwich Village Follies, similar intimate revues until Portland joined him in his act. The pair were married in 1928. In 1956, their friend Jim Harkins reflected upon Fred and Portland's relationship.
And this wonderful woman, she was a great inspiration to Fred, everything he did, because he respected her so much. When he would write hour after hour at any time in the morning, she was with him, always. All night when he'd be writing, and she would set the time for him to take the walks. When she'd say, "That's enough, let's take a walk," he would drop everything. There was never any such thing as a squabble in that family, and there was no one ever as married as they were, because they were always together everywhere, no matter where they went. He went nowhere without her, and the same with Portland. She never went anywhere without him. And if they walked down the street and holding hands, it wasn't any silly holding hands. It was a beautiful bond between two people that the average person today with this crazy way of living doesn't understand.
Together, they were able to get big-time bookings in New York and throughout the rest of the country with the Orpheum Circuit. In 1932, Allen had finished a 2-year run in Three's a Crowd, a musical revue with Clifton Webb and Libby Holman. In September, he was to return to Broadway with Polly, an Arthur Hammerstein project. When Fred returned to New York, though, he found out that promises could be broken, and the project was dead. He began to wonder about radio. By 1932, many big names like host Ed Sullivan and comedians like Ed Wynn and his good friend George Jessel were already involved in the new medium. Jessel helped convince him to audition.
He was an actor of the old school, you know, a comedian with a fine intellect. His talents would have stood up in the days of Raymond Hitchcock, Nat Goodwin, Willie Collier, and Julius Tannen on the stage. And the lecture halls, he would have ably held his own with any Will Rogers, Peter Finlay Dunn, and all the other giants of a more literate age. And as I think of him now, I think that Fred would have been more appreciated in the days of swirling capes and low bows.
Allen felt that writing a complete story in each episode or a series of episodes that better engaged the home listener would have much more long-term appeal to a radio audience. He planned a series of programs, each centered on a different business background: a bank, a department store, a detective agency. The characters would be employees and other locals. The Corn Products Company was looking for a show for their Lynette Beauty Powder. Allen got the job as host.
This is Roger White, Fred Allen's producer in the days of the Lynette Bath Club.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The makers of Lynette present another in their series of Lynette Bath Club reviews starring Fred Allen.
Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Who is it from, boy?
Joe Miller, the old joke man.
Yes?
He says you can't be here tonight.
That's too bad.
The telegram's correct. To save you the trouble, I read it on the way up.
To save me some more trouble, you can pay for it on the way back.
Okay. And now, on with the show.
After 6 or 7 weeks, the critics, everybody, who was this Fred Allen? That's what really started him. All the radio critics just want to know who Fred Allen was. From there on, he really started to rise.
The Linnet Bath Club Revue made its premiere on Sunday, October 23, 1932 at 9 p.m. on CBS. It was produced by Roger White, announced by Ken Roberts, and featured singer Helen Morgan, impersonator Sheila Barrett, as well as Roy Atwell, Jack Smart, and Charlie Carlisle. Right from the beginning, though, the control-oriented Allen had trouble with his sponsors and advertising executives. Years later, in 1954, while on Tex and Jinx, he explained.
Didn't you even have a sponsor's wife who made suggestions, who contributed to your program?
That's true. In the early days, on our first program, the Linnet program, we had the sponsor's wife like organ music. And right in the middle of our comedy program, every week we had to have an organ solo. And then when the woman found out that the organ was not in the studio, that it was 2 miles away from the studio and was piped in, this electronic marvel astounded her, and she thought that the people should be let in on that, so we had to announce that the organ is not in the studio, it's 2 miles away.
Oh, no.
And if you didn't believe it, you could go walk it. As far as we were concerned, it was uphill, too.
Because Allen had to pay for the entire show from his $1,000 a week salary, he wrote them himself with his partner Harry Tugant. It wasn't so much that he couldn't take direction. He just often felt the direction he received was biased, or was given with ignorance to radio as an entertainment medium. This would become a reoccurrence throughout his career. The program was canceled after 6 months. As mentioned earlier, Fred returned to radio on NBC Friday, August 4th, 1933 with the Salad Bowl Revue for Hellman's Mayonnaise. Minerva Pius joined the cast. She'd later be known for her ethnic character portrayals. It would mark the beginning of a 6-year relationship with the National Broadcasting Company. Allen's salary was raised to $4,000 per week. It seemed there was money in radio after all.
Presenting Fred Allen.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and as Robinson Crusoe used to say whenever he heard static, well, if it isn't Friday again. But in those days, Friday didn't bring him the Salad Bowl Revue. The papers say that the hunting season has opened, and everyone knows that the well-dressed quail is wearing a feathered frown. But while the hunter is away, his wife home in the kitchen doesn't even have to hunt through her recipe book to find that the well-dressed salad is still wearing Hellman's mayonnaise. So much for hunting unless you've lost something. Tonight, if you'll step into the Salad Bowl, ladies and gentlemen, we'll take you back to the Bedlam Sanatorium. I am still Dr. Allen, and while I'm getting my breath after running a temperature, Ferdy Grofay will show you into the waiting room accompanied by his orchestra.
It was on the Salad Bowl Revue that Allen introduced the etiquette department and the question box, in which audience members could write in to have questions answered on the air. They were advertised any question that could get by the censors would be entertained. Allen started a newsreel, the forerunner to his satirical comedy that would become the news of the week and inspire countless radio and TV comedians. His ratings were climbing. The ad agency who held the Hellman's account liked the program enough that they kept it on the air throughout the autumn, long past mayonnaise's shelf life during a time when it was a seasonal condiment for salads. However, by Christmas season, there were no salad greens left to be had. The Salad Bowl Revue exited the airwaves on December 1st, 1933. But another one of the agency's products, Sal Hepatica laxatives from Bristol-Myers, wanted in. Beginning on January 4th, 1934, Fred Allen debuted as the MC for the Sal Hepatica Revue. Years later, Allen was asked if he had a sponsor preference, and if there was any kind of sponsor he wouldn't have.
No, I don't know. We were on for laxative, and we were on for cigarettes. We've been on for a number of things. No, I don't. If it's within the law, I don't see why I should be concerned. People are in a legitimate business, and they want to sponsor me, or they can legally advertise. I don't see why I should be the one to say I don't want to be associated with it.
It was so successful that on March 21st, 1934, the broadcast was expanded to an hour to include Ipana toothpaste and dubbed the Hour of Smiles. Allen was given no additional budget, and each show had to be performed twice, one for each coast. He later hired a couple of assistants to help him with scripts. One of them was Herman Wouk, who later go on to win a Pulitzer Prize for his 1951 novel, The Caine Mutiny.
I was one of his assistant scriptwriters in Town Hall Tonight. Of course, Fred was by far the best writer of the lot on the show, and I think I can say, and nobody would argue this statement, that Fred was the best writer that radio ever had. He was an original humorist, the first quality, and the purpose of having youngsters like myself around was simply to eke out the sheer volume of the material.
By then, Allen's program style had taken on elements of a local review with the news. On July 11th, the show was retitled Town Hall Tonight. The tiny budget left no room for big stars, so Allen had to develop plot lines. Things were running smoothly until Allen was called into the agency offices. They objected to some of his jokes and didn't like the concept of a running gag, something Allen had begun to develop. In Treadmill to Oblivion, Allen explained that running gags were very important on radio. They subtly carried over from one program to the next and stimulated the listener's interest. The agency disagreed. Allen paid them no mind.
Why do you describe an advertising agency as being 85% confusion and 15% commission?
Well, because in the early days of radio, these men who were good, competent businessmen, I certainly were good advertising men, were thrown into another business that they didn't understand. They didn't know anything about show business or actors, and consequently they just treated all of us the way they treated their copy or their tomatoes or the things that they were trying to sell or advertise in the other media until radio got started.
Mm-hmm.
They were forcing their opinions on the actors, and the things that the audience got were the likes and dislikes of their friends and relatives and close associates, you know.
Well,
they foisted their taste on the general public. I mean, if a sponsor liked a violin player, he had a violin player on his own. The people may not like violin players, as proven by Jack Benny's career. He was forced into comedy off the musical, off the concert stage.